Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking to you from south of Jerusalem. Today is the fourth day of the month of Tevet, 5783. It's December 27th, 2022. This coming Shabbat we read the penultimate Torah reading, the penultimate Parashat of the book of Genesis, Sefer Bereshit in Hebrew. And that is called Vayigash, and Vayigash, which means and he approached. Vayigash begins in the book of Genesis, chapter 44, verse 18, concludes chapter 47, verse 27, and it is the penultimate, as I said, Torah reading of the book of Genesis, but it really contains the climax, the climactic episode of the entire story of Yosef and his brothers, which really is the climax for the entire book of Genesis. We'll talk about that very soon. I mentioned that it is Tevet, the 4th of Tevet. Chanukah is behind us. The last night of lighting Chanukah lights was on Sunday evening, and the final day was Monday. And we are moving right along. The month of Tevet. We didn't have really a chance to talk about it last week because Tevet, Rosh Chodesh Tevet was on Shabbat and the first day of this week. And Tevet is the only month in the Hebrew calendar that begins in the middle of a holiday. It would be the only month that begins with a holiday, except of course there is Rosh Hashanah, which begins on the 1st of Tishrei. And of course Hanukkah it's not a biblical mandated holiday. It's not one of the three pilgrimage festivals that we read about in the Torah. It's not Sukkot or Shavuot or Pesach, Passover, and it is not Yom Kippur, and it is not Rosh Hashanah. It was a holiday that was new and added onto our calendar many, many hundreds of years after the giving of Torah. And of course it commemorates the story of the Hashmonaim, aka the Maccabim, who liberated the temple. We know the story. I've been talking about it extensively for the past few weeks. It is behind us now, and what awaits us in the month of Tevet, which, by the way, begins more or less every year at the very darkest time of the year. This year, actually, I think the winter solstice may have been a day before the first day of Rosh Chodesh Tevet. Of course, the winter solstice is the day that the nighttime hours are the longest throughout the solar year, and the daytime hours when the sun is up are the shortest. It's the darkest time of the year, and of course Hanukkah always falls out more or less right on this time. I mean, it varies a bit because of the variation, because of the Hebrew calendar is not completely in line with the solar calendar, being a calendar that is lunar with solar adjustments. But it's a beautiful time for a celebration of lights, a festival of lights, when in this darkness we light up, and each night add another light. And the real takeaway from that is that, as we like to say in Hebrew, or Mugaresh Choshek, the light will drive away the darkness, and even a tiny bit of light drives away a lot of darkness. And that's the takeaway that we take with us throughout the year, that just as the Hashmonaim were few in number compared to the Greek army, and much less well equipped, yet they overcame their adversaries, and the weak defeated the strong, the few defeated the many, and the pure at heart defeated the evildoers. And a little bit of light can defeat a whole lot of darkness. So let's keep that in our minds, keep that in our hearts as we move forward throughout the year. and especially in these dark, dark days, which are getting longer now, right? Hanukkah finishes, and as Hanukkah takes place, the days are already getting a little bit longer each day. And you don't really feel it yet, but we will be feeling it soon, especially when all of us who keep the Shabbat, and the Shabbat, of course, comes in very early during this time of the year and ends very early during this time of the year, and doesn't contain a whole lot of daylight hours. But so it may take a few weeks, but we'll start to feel the change as we light our Shabbat candles on a Friday afternoon, Friday early evening, a little bit later each week, and conclude the Shabbat a little bit later each week, until, of course, we hit the summer solstice, and then we start going the other direction. But talking about all this light, however, there are 3 days in the month of Tevet, which are not really days of light, they're days of darkness. And they are the 8th and the 9th and the 10th of Tevet. And at one time in our history, there were those who observed each of the 3 days as a fast day, not a 24-hour fast, but a dawn to dark fast. And of course, it makes sense that this time of year, those types of fast days are actually the shortest fast days of the year, because there's so few daylight hours. But we're talking about the 8th, 9th, and 10th of Tevet. And the 8th of Tevet was the day that the Hebrew Torah, the 5 books of Moses, as we sometimes call them, Chamesh Humshei Torah, 5 books of Moses, were first translated from Hebrew into a different language, and that different language, of course, was Greek. And it was done at the insistence, really, of the King Ptolemy of Egypt, who had built his fantastic library in Alexandria. You may have heard about the ancient library of Alexandria that contained thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of scrolls, of written literature, written documents. It was a tremendous center of knowledge. In fact, the city of Alexandria during this time, which was about 100 years BCE, more or less, was a huge city at the time, happened to have a very, very large Jewish population, and it was a metropolis that was one of the great centers of the ancient world. And Ptolemy established this library, which was one of the great wonders of the ancient world, which I believe the Romans burned and destroyed. Who knows what? We'll never know. Priceless writings from the ancients and from all the different cultures. Anyway, Ptolemy, he wanted to include the Torah in his library, but he was told, listen, the Torah is written in a different language, and it's holy to the Jews, so you need to talk to the Jews. So he had 72 sages, want to call them rabbis, sages, Jewish sages, brought into Egypt. And I think that the politics of the day was such that there wasn't really, would you like to do this? It's you're being called upon to do this, you have to do it. So 72 sages were brought into Egypt, and as the story goes, they were each put into a separate room. They could not contact the others. One could not contact another, and each given the task of translating the Torah into Greek. And the final product was what we call today the Septuagint, which is still a holy book for different religions, for different Christian denominations, of course. And it's also a tremendous historical document. And if I recall correctly, there were 15 different places in the text, in the writing, in the Torah, which each of the sages felt compelled to digress a bit from a literal translation, because a literal translation from Hebrew into Greek would create a misleading understanding. And so each one of these 72 sages made the exact same correction in the exact same places. So again, according to Jewish tradition, it was a very miraculous event, something that you say, well, this is great. More people, first of all, more people can learn the Torah. And there were many Jews at that time also that did not know Hebrew. There's a famous Jewish philosopher called Philo, and he lived in Alexandria during this same era, and he wrote voluminously, how do you say? He wrote volumes on the Torah in Greek. He did not know Hebrew. So yes, it was a great tool for learning. So where's the downside here? The downside is that it also, up till now, the Torah was the exclusive domain of the Israelites / Hebrews / Jews. And they're the only ones who understood Hebrew, and the only ones who could read and understand the Torah. And now it became pretty much public domain. Anybody could read it, and meaning anybody could interpret it the way they want it, and lead to misunderstandings and lead to heretical understandings of the text. And of course, this is ultimately what happened, that the Torah became the property of all humankind. Eventually it would be translated, into many, many languages, of course. Today it's translated probably into every language. And even around the same time, it was being translated into Aramaic, because during the late period of the Second Temple and beyond, many Jews also, even in the land of Israel, no longer spoke Hebrew as a spoken language, and many couldn't read Hebrew. Aramaic was the common language at the time. There was Greek and there was Aramaic. And Aramaic is very close to Hebrew, but it's not the same. It's another Semitic language, and it has tremendous stature in Judaism because it was a written language, because many of our holy books are written in Aramaic, including much of the Gemara, actually the entire Gemara. And as I say, some of the Targumim, the translations into Aramaic, are considered to be very holy. And the Zohar, of course, is written in Aramaic, and many other books. But the Greek language never had that status for Jews. So anyway, it's considered to be a dark day. That's the 8th of Tevet. The 9th of Tevet is a little more shrouded in mystery, and not everybody agrees on exactly why it's considered to be a dark day, but one tradition is that it is the day that Ezra, the great sage, Ezra HaSofer, Ezra the scribe, who led the Jews out of the Babylonian exile back to Jerusalem when Cyrus, the Persian king, said, "Go back and build your temple." He led them, and not only led them physically, but led them spiritually. And he was really the one who reintroduced the centrality, or maybe introduced for the first time historically, the incredible centrality of the Torah as something to be studied and read and learned from every day, not simply a rule book left for the Kohanim, for the priests, or the intelligentsia to study, but for everybody. And he also, among the 42,300, I think, Jews that went back to to Jerusalem from Babylon, Ezra brought them back to a true Torah lifestyle. Many had been 50 to 70 years in exile, and they were losing their way. So he brought them back, and he really reestablished the Jewish Commonwealth, the second Jewish Commonwealth, after the destruction of the first temple. And of course, he was had a major hand in building the second temple. And so his death, of course, is a dark day, because people of the stature of Ezra don't come along every day. He's really considered to be a second Moshe, a second Moshe Rabbeinu, a second Moses, in terms of stature, in terms of importance to the people, to our nation. And of course, the 10th of Tevet is the one day that we still observe as a fast. And the 10th of Tevet was the day that the Babylonian army, now, you see, we're skipping back and forth time-wise, chronologically. We're just talking about Ezra, who's post-destruction of the first temple. And now we're going to the 10th of Tevet, which is the day that the Babylonian army, before it had entered Jerusalem or destroyed the temple, the day that it first laid siege on Jerusalem, before Jerusalem's destruction, which obviously ultimately led to the destruction. And so it is a fast day. It's one of the 4 fast days mentioned by the prophet Zechariah. He mentions the fast of the what are the months? It's the fast of the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 10th. I'm not sure. I forget the day, the months. They're listed by the number of the month, but it is the fast. The 4 fasts are of course Tevet, 10th of Tevet, the 17th of Tammuz, the 9th of Av, and the 4th fast is Tzom Gedalia. It must be Tzom Gedalia, the fast on the 3rd day of Tishrei. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, that is the 10th. So in the middle of this month of Tevet, we have these 3 somber days. And as I said, the 10th of Tevet is a fast day, a dawn to dark day, fast day, which, as I said, it is the shortest fast day of the year. Not necessarily the simplest or the easiest, but it is the shortest. And so after this burst of light, we sort of get a little bit of a sobering up. And again, the Jewish calendar encompasses 6,000 years of history. So it goes back and forth. Some celebrations or commemorations are from very recent history, and some are from very, very ancient history, and everything in between. So that's the month of Tevet. Let's go on to Parashat Vayigash. As I mentioned before, Vayigash begins in the book of Genesis, chapter 44, verse 18, and we're going to read the first few verses from Vayigash right now, first in Hebrew, then in English. Vayigash elav Yehuda, Vayomer bi Adoni, yedeber na avdecha, davar beoznei Adoni, v'al yichar apcha avdecha, ki chamocha kfar'o. Adoni sha'al et avadav lemor, hayesh lachem av o ach, vanomer el Adoni, yesh lanu av zaken v'yeled zkunim katan, v'achiv met, ויוותר הוא לבדו לאמו ואביו אהבו. ותאמר אל עבדיך הורידוהו אלי ואשימה עיני עליו. ונאמר אל אדוני לא יוכל הנער לעזוב את אביו ועזב את אביו ומת. Okay, let's pick up where we left off last week. As we know, the brothers, the 10 brothers of Yosef, one brother, Shimon, is being held captive by Yosef, sort of as ransom, to make sure the other brothers will come back with Binyamin, Yosef's little brother. And of course, when the brothers went back to Canaan, to their father Yaakov, sometime later, the food ran out again, and Yaakov said, go back down to Egypt and get more food. And they said, we can't go, as we told you, we can't go without Binyamin. And Basically, Yaakov said, over my dead body, because he said, if you take him away, something's going to happen. You already cost me, Yosef, and Shimon. I'm not going to let you take Binyamin, because if I lose Binyamin, that's it. I'm finished. I can't live anymore. But after Reuven, the eldest, tried to convince Yaakov to trust him with Binyamin's safety, and Yaakov was not convinced, then Yehuda stepped up and he pledged a very emotional pledge to his father that he would not allow it to occur, that he would not allow a hair on Binyamin's head to be harmed. Now, of course, this whole thing is Yosef's test of his brothers, who still don't know who he is, to see how they're going to react, how they're going to deal with another one of their brothers, a son of Rachel, of Rachel, right? Not a half brother to them. How they'll deal with his safety. How they'll be concerned about him after they plotted to kill Yosef and then sold him. How are they going to react when they're put in this situation again? And of course, as we know, the reaction is very different. They have learned their lesson. They are repenting. That's what this whole story is about. They're doing tshuva. They're changing their ways. They're fixing what went wrong last time. And so Yaakov let the boys go down back to Egypt with Binyamin, and they meet up and they have a meal together with Yosef and the Egyptians. Everything is wonderful. And then they leave, and Yosef instructs one of his servants to place his own silver goblet into the bag of Binyamin. And then after the boys leave, they're on their way. They've left Egypt. They've left the city. And Yosef has his guards catch up with them, and they search for this stolen silver goblet, and of course find it in Binyamin's bag, and they're brought back, and he says, the brothers offer to be slaves. They say, and he says, no, I only want Binyamin. He's a slave. He stole it. He's my slave. You guys can go back to your father. See you. Have a good time. Okay. They can do exactly what they did 20 years earlier. They can go back to their father and say, oh, whatever, something happened. Last time they brought back Yosef's coat with the blood on it. And this time they can do the same. But they don't, of course, because they've changed, because they've learned. They have never sat easy since they did what they did to Yosef. And now with all this unexplainable bad things happening to them, they are feeling that it's just like retribution, the karma. They're getting it. It's coming back to them. So, Vayigash. Okay, so Yosef. Let's just read the last. So they confront Yosef about this, and Yehuda said, "What can we say to my Lord? How can we speak? How can we justify ourselves? God has uncovered the sin of your servants. Here we are. We are ready to be slaves to my Lord, both we and the one in whose hand the goblet was found." But Yosef replied, "It would be sacrilegious for me to do this. The man in whose possession the goblet was found, only he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father." Okay, that's how we concluded last week's reading, and this week starts up with Vayigash. Then Yehuda approached Vayigash, drew near to him, to Yosef, and said, "If you please, my lord, may your servant speak a word in my lord's ears, and not let your anger flare up to your servant, for you are like Pharaoh." Yehuda is speaking very carefully. Of course, he doesn't know he's speaking to Yosef. He's speaking to the second most powerful man in Egypt, the most powerful country in the world. And he's being very cautious, but forceful. "For you are like Pharaoh. My Lord has asked his servants, saying, 'Have you a father or brother?' And we said to my Lord, 'We have an old father and a young child of his old age. His brother is dead. He alone is left from his mother, and his father loves him.' Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me, and I will set my eye on him.' We said to my Lord, 'The youth cannot leave his father, for should he leave his father, he will die.' But you said to your servants, 'If your youngest brother does not come down with you, you will not see my face again.'" Okay. That's how we begin, and he continues, Yehuda, explaining the whole situation, and finally, Yehuda says, listen, there's no way, I can't go back without my brother, without Binyamin. I can't. It's not going to happen. Right? He's confronting the second most powerful man in Egypt, the man who holds their lives in his hands, in the palm of his hand, and he is being polite, he is being respectful, but he is being forceful. He is not giving up an inch here, and he's saying, it's not going to happen. Like, my Lord, you got to figure out something else, but this ain't going to happen. And in fact, the word vayigash, our sages explain, which means drew near, it's a word of often describing a battle. The armies drew near. Interesting, there's two words. The actual word for battle is krav, which means to draw, which means near. They drew near, like a korban is something that allows us to draw. It's a korban is an offering. It allows us to draw near to Hashem. And a krav is when two opposing armies have drawn near to fight. And vayigash is another word used to describe war. So this was a confrontation that was either going to end nicely or not nicely, but it wasn't going to end without a fight or a struggle. And the struggle, in this case, was entirely Yosef's. He basically had to come out and say, I'm Yosef, I'm your brother. The brothers had proved what Yosef was searching for. They had proved that they were not going to give up on their brother. They were not going to do the same thing again. They had learned their lesson, and their brother's life was precious to them, and their father's life was also precious to them. And so having proved this, he reveals himself. The brothers are, of course, speechless. It says that right here. It says, he cried out in a loud voice. Egypt heard, and Pharaoh's household heard, and Yosef said to his brothers, I am Yosef. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him because they were left disconcerted before him. They were in a state of shock. And then Yosef very quickly calls them close. And in fact here, it says, again, that word vayigash, but it's geshuna Eli, draw near to me. Now he wants them to draw near, not in confrontation, but he wants them to recognize him. And the first thing he says is, don't be distressed, don't be angry with yourselves. Everything that happened, the bad thing that you did to me, you meant a bad thing, but God meant it for good, because now you're here. Your lives have been saved because there's going to be another 5 years of this brutal famine, and you're here where I can provide for you, make sure that you have what to eat for the next 5 years. And so this has been God's plan. Yosef, of course, was a huge believer in God's plan. I mean, he had dreams about God's plan. And he, when he heard the Pharaoh's dreams, he said, this is God's plan. So Yosef had this vision. He had this ability to understand how God works in history, right? Works as time progresses, how God has a plan and how it works out and how we're part of it, and how even though we are all individuals and we all have free will and we all can make our own decisions, and we're still part of this great plan that God has for us. And yes, the brothers could have, they could have not hated Yosef. They could have not decided to kill him. They could have not have sold him. A thousand things, 1,000 decisions, 1,000 things they did, could have been different. But they weren't. All of their actions were based on their own free will, yet it's all part of God's plans. And so here they are reunited, and the first thing, of course, Yosef wants to do is for them to go back and tell their father that he is alive and to bring him down, and he sends them back. And also Pharaoh is very excited to hear about this, and they sends the brothers back with wagons in order to carry the children and the women and the provisions, and with lots of food, all sorts of things. And he each gives each of his brothers 5 garments, and he gives 5 garments and a whole lot of money to his brother Binyamin. Now, it's not explained why he did that. 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothing to his brother, except that he may have been hinting at the fact that one of the things his brothers had been jealous about was that he had this beautiful coat, right? Ketonet pasim, this many-colored garment of his. And so he is giving Binyamin an extra, sort of testing them again, even if they really passed the test, but he's contesting them again. Are you going to have a problem with this? Are you going to be jealous again? And he even says, right after, where it describes what he gave his brothers, it says, do not be agitated on the way. Don't fight. Be good. And of course, I don't think they needed that hint. They were good boys now. They went back, told their father. Very interesting midrash about how they told their father they were concerned. You tell an elderly man some shocking news, even if it's good news, his heart might not be able to take it. He might just keel over on the spot. So how can they break it to him gently? And so, if you notice, later on in Vayigash, there is a list of all of Yaakov's progeny, all his children and his children's children. And, of course, it's the men who are mentioned here, with the exception of Dinah, who's mentioned, and one other woman whose name we haven't heard till now, and that is Serach, the daughter of Asher. Asher, of course, is one of the 12 sons of Yaakov. She's mentioned here. And, of course, we have to ask why. So, why she mentioned so close as part of this whole story. And the midrashic explanation is that the brothers went to her when they came back and they said, listen, our brother Yosef is alive. We want to tell our father, but we're afraid if we just come out and say it, he won't be able to take it. His heart will stop beating. So she sat by her father with a harp and started to play music, gentle music. And she started to sing a song. And in the song, she slowly began to hint at the fact that Yosef was alive and in Egypt, until finally it slowly sank in to Yaakov's consciousness, and he understood and realized, and he was able to hear this news without dropping dead from emotion. Now, the Midrash goes on to tell us that Serach, for doing this wonderful thing, was rewarded with exceptionally long life. And why do they say that? Because her name's mentioned again as someone who enters into the land of Israel hundreds of years later, right? And I think her name is mentioned again also in the book of Joshua or the book of Judges. So her name is mentioned a few times. So if we're talking about the same Serach bat Asher, and I don't know why we wouldn't be, she lived to be hundreds and hundreds of years old. And this was her reward for this wonderful thing that she did. Anyway, the story itself from the text in Genesis simply says that they told their father, and his heart was revived. And here's the music. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.